As the high school football season rolls on, we've got you covered. This is Next Round Preps on the Double Down Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. Welcome in to Next Round Preps as we head into the final week of the regular season, officially week 10, the 11th overall week. And so because of that, so many teams are off this week. It seems like most teams are off this week, but still some rivalries outside of region in some different areas, and then some regions do still have to play through this week. Jerry Young here alongside me. I'm John Lunceford, and Jerry, it was a fun and interesting week last week.
Yeah, it was. We answered all the questions. I won't say all of them, but like you say, almost all of them. And, of course, the big game, Hoover came into Thompson, which is a rare thing. They did a rare thing, which is beat the Warriors on their home field in front of a sold-out crowd. Absolutely phenomenal atmosphere there at Warrior Stadium. But, Hoover put it on Thompson 9-0. Thompson had their chances. They missed a field goal. They, had a block punt inside the 10. Couldn't capitalize on that. Threw interceptions. It's just a bad night for Thompson, really. But if you look back, the history will show this has happened before, where Thompson loses to Hoover and then goes on to win the state championship. So is that something that's going to happen? We'll find out as we get into playoffs here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's what happened last year. Hoover beat Thompson in that first matchup, and Thompson had some quarterback issues then with injuries, and then Thompson went and beat Hoover, who had some quarterback injuries. Hoover's had quarterback injuries already this season. Thompson has a little bit of a quarterback battle there as well, so it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Because of that result, Hoover, the 1 seed out of Region 3, they will host Bob Jones out of Region 4, the 4 seed there. Florence, the 2nd seed out of Region 4, will host Hewitt-Trussville, who was locked in before last week into the 3 seed. So that'll be the top quadrant of 7A's playoffs. Austin, they will host Vestavia, who beat Tuscaloosa County last week to get in. Vestavia may be the hottest team in this whole northern half right here. They will travel to Austin, and then Thompson, because they're the 2nd seed now, will host Huntsville, who got in by way of beating Austin last week or a couple weeks ago. So that will put Huntsville in as the 3 seed. So Thompson will host Huntsville. Hoover will host Bob Jones. Those were results we were waiting on going into the week. So that northern half, Region 3, if they won every game, wouldn't totally shock me. If Region 4 were able to win a couple, maybe, because some of the teams have struggled. But it'll be interesting to see it play out. You
mentioned Vestavia Hills. There's another team in 7A that's playing like Vestavia with an 8-2 record. That's Florence. Very quietly, they've been adding wins all throughout the year. Florence is a sleeper. They beat Sparkman last week 21-0. They shut them out. So Florence, always had a reputation of having a strong defense. They may have one this year that's going to be hard to get around.
And the team they're playing in the first round, Hewitt-Trussville, sitting as the 3 seed because they lost to Hoover and Thompson. But they lost to Thompson because Thompson stopped them on a 2-point conversion at the end of the game. And they lost to Hoover 17-7 early on. So that was still a close game right there. I mean, Hewitt-Trussville, here's the thing. I could see Hewitt-Trussville making a run all the way to the Super 7, the way they played. I could see Vestavia making a run all the way to the Super 7 because they are on fire right now the way they've been playing. Their only loss in recent weeks has been a 1-score loss to Hewitt-Trussville. That was a shootout. I think it was 45-37 was the final score in that one. But they played Thompson super close for a half before Thompson kind of pulled away late with a Vestavia quarterback injury. So if they were to meet in the second round, who knows if they could potentially pull an upset there. And they played Hoover to a 6-point game, 20-14. They played Hoover that close the week after. So, with Thompson struggling last week the way they looked, Hoover having quarterback issues there. I mean, Vestavia and Hewitt are primed to maybe do something.
I think round 2 of the playoffs this year in 7A classification is going to be some of the best ball games of the whole year. This is stacking up to be, and we mentioned this, John. We said, some of these teams that hadn't really shown much the last 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden they're back in it. Prattville still has a chance. They beat Central. They're in it. So, Foley's down there quietly winning as well. So we're talking about Foley. We're talking about Florence. We're talking about Prattville. All these teams that we haven't, Florence has always been in there, but they've always been the 4th seed. So, but for them to really have a chance to win a game, so I think round 2, we'll get round 1 shaked out here in a couple of weeks, but round 2 is going to be something.
Yeah, I mentioned the matchups for the northern half. The southern half, you mentioned Foley. They locked up the region title this past week, and so they'll be the 1 seed. They will host whoever ends up being the 4 seed out of Region 2. This week is really important for Region 2, not because of non-region, but because they are in a 9-team region now, and all those playoff spots, nobody is locked in that region right now. Even Central and Auburn, who are the top 2 teams, but still have to determine who's going to be number 1 and number 2. But as of right now, Foley hosts Dothan the way I have it playing out, but that could be Prattville, that could be Enterprise. Depending on what happens, it'll be one of those 3 teams. Auburn, if they do finish second, which as long as they would have to win and Central would have to lose this week in order to be first. But if they're second, they're going to have to host a team like Fairhope, who was right in the region title discussion up until it finally shook out. Mary Montgomery would have to travel to Central if Central is indeed 1, or you flip Auburn and Central there. And then Baker will host whoever finishes third between Enterprise, Dothan, and Prattville there. So you mentioned the second round playoffs. Just take the top teams out. Foley would host Auburn, and Central Phoenix City would host Baker, or that's a spot maybe Prattville could work their way into. Prattville, Enterprise, Dothan, the teams that are fighting for that third spot. And then you have Hoover versus either Florence or Hewitt, and Austin or Vestavia versus Thompson, assuming, chalk hold. So, I mean, you're right. That is a stacked bracket for 7A, but you know what? 7A is kind of built as that super class, and that's kind of what you expect.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about lower classifications as we get into this show a little more. Congratulations to 1A Region 1 Milry Wildcats. They defeated the Leroy Bears last week to win their region championship. Reeltown with the win over the Flying Squadron of Highland Home. They won their region championship in Dadeville, beat Randolph County, 2 undefeated 8-0 teams going in there as well. Hillcrest Tuscaloosa with a big win, and even bigger, Gardendale over Mountain Brook. I'll be honest with you, John, I didn't see that coming. I don't think anybody did.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm totally shocked because Gardendale has been building up to be really good, especially there in the Chad Eads. But I did think Mountain Brook would win this game, and I thought they would win by a couple of scores. And the fact that Gardendale got that win, now they're a region champ, and they're going to sit there. And we were all sitting around the table last night, and I was sitting there with a Hoover grad who won a region championship. I'm a Homewood grad, won a region championship. A Gardendale grad who won a region championship. A Clay Chaltville grad that won a region championship. And the thing is, a lot of the teams have kind of spread out because Clay and Gardendale used to be in the same region. They've separated now, so Gardendale and Clay able to be region champs. Homewood's gone down to the south now in Region 3 instead of being in that same region with Mountain Brook. They're a region champ down there. So this is where reclassification, it moves teams around, but it lets you all get placed. And there's a bunch of 1s next to names on my bracket now in Class 6A that it's like, it's interesting to see that team sitting there at number 1. Gardendale, they will host Oxford, though. That'll be a good first-round matchup for Gardendale in the playoffs. And Centerpoint, they finished second. They're behind Clay Chaltville. They'll host Jackson Nolan. Mountain Brook, they'll host Pinson Valley, who is third. Clay Chaltville obviously winning that region, but Mountain Brook has to host Pinson Valley. That's a first-round matchup that you typically would see. Go back a few years when, the Nix family was there at Pinson Valley. I mean, that's a matchup you'd see in the semifinals, and they're playing each other in the first round. So, yeah, a lot of phenomenal matchups there. Homewood playing McAdory, Hillcrest playing Calera, Saraland playing Wetumpka, Pike Road playing Spanish Fort. I mean, these are matchups you would see 2 or 3 rounds in as opposed to seeing in the first round. But that's what happens when you have this reclassification. Everybody kind of gets shifted around. But you mentioned Gardendale getting the win 29-28 over Mountain Brook. Hillcrest and McAdory, I mentioned Hillcrest, they won 35-14 over McAdory. Ben Russell, how about Helena falling out of the playoffs?
Yeah, isn't that something?
I mean, they won. They were a 2 seed. They lost. They were out of the playoffs because of that, 4 overtime loss they had to Calera. Calera sneaks into the playoffs. Ben Russell moves to third. They won 47-14 over Helena.
John, we started this season, and I mentioned Calera, that there was a different atmosphere in Calera. They're broadcasting all their games now on the NFHS network. I helped them get that started last year, so I knew they were going into it full time. The community is around, and they did some upgrades at the field. And look what's happened, Calera in the playoffs after defeating Helena earlier in the year. That's a huge accomplishment for them.
It is. I watched the Calera Briarwood game, I believe, on that broadcast on the NFHS network because we played we had our game at Thompson on Thursday that week. And, good broadcast there from Calera, and they are in as the 4 seed in the playoffs. They're going to have to go to Hillcrest, so that's a tall order for them to have to play Hillcrest. Everybody's been asking me, can Hillcrest make a little bit of a run? Potentially. I think they've had some injuries, but, Hillcrest is sitting there unbeaten in the South, along with Theodore, should they win this week, would be unbeaten as well. But I mentioned Briarwood. They will not make the playoffs. They went to Homewood. Homewood won 34-10. In that one, no shock based on how the season had played out, but this is actually one of the few games Briarwood didn't play down to the last second. As many last-second games as they had, Homewood gets that win. In the South, I mentioned Theodore. They beat Saraland. That was a big game, 27-26. I fully expect these two teams to make a little bit of a run to potentially play each other again in the semifinals. Spanish Fort sitting right there as well. They got to play Pike Road. Pike Road lost to Carver 22-19. So a lot of close region title games down there in 6A. And then Centerpoint, Oxford. I mentioned those two earlier. Centerpoint beat Oxford 41-24 to get the second seed there in that region. Great job by George Bates. By the way, this week Centerpoint and Leeds canceled their game. That said it was a mutual decision to cancel
no reason why.
It almost kind of seems like they don't want to play the game before the playoffs and take a little extra break, but not a lot of fans of that one because
I can tell you this, there's a rivalry inside that rivalry, and that's Jerry Hood and George Bates.
Yep.
Those two guys love to play each other. They have a lot of respect, but they love to play each other. So I'm shocked that game was canceled.
Yeah, a little bit of an interesting note there. That game was originally on Friday, then they moved to Thursday at 6, and then they just canceled it altogether. So that game will not happen this week, but it would have been a good game between, one of the top two teams there in 5A. Leeds is second, I believe, right behind UMS Wright, and then, of course, Centerpoint. They've had a really good season this year.
That's right. And, looking at the top 10 in 5A, these teams all made it in. UMS Wright leads the way. Leeds is second. Pleasant Grove, no surprise there. The Spartans always in it. Ramsey back up to strength. Moody with a we've talked about them all year. Congratulations. Gulf Shores, usually not mentioned in that top 10. They sit at number 6 this week in the playoffs. Faith Academy, Arab, Demopolis, and Charles Henderson. Charles Henderson, another name we don't talk about very often.
Yeah. Let's see. In 5A, a couple of those games, Gulf Shores, they did beat Viger this week 37-21 to lock up home field in second. Viger is done with their season. They can still get in a tiebreaker for fourth, but they can't win that tiebreaker for fourth. So that knocked Viger out of the playoffs. So a big win there for Gulf Shores. Pleasant Grove, you mentioned, they beat Jasper 45-14. No shock there. Pleasant Grove won, but a big win for them. They're second. Jasper's third in that region. Jasper has Homewood this week, but Jasper dropping down to 5A and making the playoffs there. Moody beat Southside Gadsden to lock up home field with second. 35-13. Southside Gadsden will make the playoffs, though, in fourth. And Russellville, a team who's always hanging out there and up there in Region 8, they beat Fairview 41-14. They win the region. Fairview second. So Russellville trying to make a run. Back when I was in school, it was always Homewood and Russellville playing each other. And
the Golden Tigers.
Yep, both my state championships against Russellville. And before that, when Homewood was in the North, they played them in the semifinals and then played Benjamin Russell in the championship game there a couple years in a row. So, and that's for the most part all the big games. Region 3, Spain Park falls Oak Mountain. Oak Mountain into the season with the win. Tyler Crane, though, just let go from Oak Mountain. So we'll see where they move for next year. Hewitt all over Chelsea, 45-14.
Yeah, the best game, John, in 5A was Friday night. UMS Wright defeated Faith Academy 21-20. What a ball game. Faith Academy was ranked 7th and probably still are ranked 7th in the state. UMS won, so just to finish up 5A there.
Yeah, Faith Academy, I think, can make a little bit of a run. I mean, it was a one-point game against the best team in 5A, so depending on how things ultimately shake out in that playoff bracket, I can see them making a little bit of a run. They will, let's see, UMS Wright will host Headland in the first round. Faith Academy, they will have to travel, though, to Eufaula. Gulf Shores finished second in that region. Gulf Shores will host Carroll. But, Faith Academy, they'll play Demopolis in the second round if they can get past Eufaula, and then play a team like Central Clay County or Gulf Shores in the quarterfinals before the bottom half, where UMS Wright looks pretty strong. They're trying to make a run all the way to yet another Super 7. All right. Kind of jumped around right there, but the brackets, that's what really what's important now. We're all kind of focused on the playoffs and what will happen there. However, coming up this week, Region 2 has a lot of big, important games in 7A Region 2. A lot of teams are off, so a lot of teams we normally talk about, we won't talk about. We're off this week with Thompson. Hoover's off. A lot of big teams are off. But some non-region matchups this week to potentially set the stage for the playoffs and kind of let you know where certain teams are. We mentioned like that Leeds Centerpoint game. There's a lot of games like that, inter-class, inter-region games within the different classifications. But we'll look at all those and kind of what it means for the playoff picture when we get back right here on Next Round Preps.
At Albritton and Artavino Family Dentistry, we know how valuable your time is. So if it's a crown you need, let us take care of it with our same-day crown service. We have the latest technology allowing us to build your custom crown right here in our office while you wait. Albritton and Artavino Family Dentistry is here to serve you.
Albritton and Artavino are easy to find. Exit 238, that's the Alabaster exit, next door to American Family Care, or call them at 205-664-7610.
Alabaster Living has been a major community supporter for years in the Alabaster area and is excited to introduce their new streaming TV channel. Alabaster Living Television can be found on Roku and Fire Stick and has new video content featuring Thompson High School, the city of Alabaster, local churches, businesses, and citizens added weekly. Just load ALTV to your streaming device and start watching to see all that Alabaster has to offer. You can also follow Alabaster Living on Facebook and YouTube to stay on top of everything going on in the community. Add ALTV to your Roku or Fire Stick device today.
Hi, I'm Jerry Young. I want to tell you about Holloway Home Loans here in Central Alabama. Thomas Holloway is a former Oak Mountain Eagle who moved on to play his college ball and earn his degree from West Point. Thomas is still an Army reservist and an expert in residential home mortgages, offering personalized service at an amazing price because he works for you and not the financial institutions. Call Thomas today at 205-413-2858, or you can email him, thomas@hollowayhomeloans.com. That's Holloway Home Loans and Edge Home Financing, MLS 1985757.
Cartridge World of Vestavia is well known for the lowest prices on toner cartridges, but are you aware of their free printer program? You heard right. There's no catch. Simply agree to buy your ongoing printer cartridges from Cartridge World of Vestavia, and we'll provide you with a printer at no cost. A Cartridge World expert will personally consult with you to find out your business's exact needs so you can have a stronger bottom line. Visit Cartridge World of Vestavia Hills on the web or call 205-822-6767. That's Cartridge World of Vestavia. Welcome back into Next Round Preps. We are heading into the final week of the regular season, and for the vast majority of teams, that either means one of two things. You're off because your season's done with, at least the regular season, or you're playing a non-region game against a rival, another team that's close by, trying to get some, last-second wins there, or potentially test yourself for the playoffs. However, there are 9-team regions. This is kind of the way things are in the new 7 classification system. We have 6-team regions, we have 7-team regions, we have 8-team regions, and 9-team regions, which will play all the way through this week. None of those bigger than Class 7A Region 2. We'll end with that. At first, we'll go down to some of the interclass matchups there between some like 5A and 6A teams. McAdory and Calera. Calera, we talked about, working their way into the playoffs. McAdory, always a playoff team, usually over in Region 4, but both 4 seeds playing each other here, so kind of a good test to let you know where they'll be. Calera will have to travel to Hillcrest in the first round. McAdory will have to travel to Homewood in the first round, but a good game between two, I would say, fairly evenly matched teams here. Yeah,
Homewood should take that one without any problem, John, and we know that. And Calera had a great run, but it's going to end this week.
Yeah, Calera, we'll see. We'll see what they can do. Gardendale, they will host Hueytown. This should be a good one. Hueytown, the 2 seed in Region 4. Gardendale, we mentioned, winning the region title. They could not meet until the Super 7. So they will meet now. And, Hueytown and Clay Chalkville had those games where they ultimately met again in the Super 7. Any chance Gardendale and Hueytown could make a run all the way to the Super 7?
Gardendale can. After what they showed me against Mountain Brook, absolutely. Clay Chalkville's going to be in there, but I'm going to tell you, there's Mountain Brook, Clay Chalkville, and Gardendale, my top 3 teams there.
Yeah, Hartselle unbeaten up there. They still have a game left this week, but
you made the key word. They're up there, and no team from up there ever really does that well.
No, I mean, you're right. I mean, they really don't. They're playing Bob Jones this week, 2 playoff teams. Bob Jones will play Hoover in the first round of the playoffs, but we'll see if they can take down Hartselle, as that's 7A going down to 6A to play Hartselle. But, yeah, we actually had this conversation last night with a few people. When I was talking to all of our friends that were all at all these different schools that won the region. It's like, well, what about Hartselle? They're unbeaten. Everybody's kind of rolled their eyes and said, I don't know. I just can't believe that they get it done. Look, them, Muscle Shoals, they're all good teams, Decatur, Coleman. But can they do anything in the playoffs? We'll see what happens with the playoffs there, but Bob Jones at Hartselle this week. Homewood's at Jasper, a little bit of a tune-up. Both teams are playoff teams, but Jasper down at 5A now. Homewood trying to move to 8-3 on the season.
I had high hopes for Jasper this year. But they just didn't come on like I expected them to. Homewood should really take care of business.
Yeah, that game last week against Pleasant Grove, 45-14, they fell. But, we'll see if they maybe can shock somebody in the playoffs. Who knows? I like this. A lot of Mobile 7A Region 1 teams are playing Birmingham area teams this week. So, when I was in school, we only went down to Mobile if we were playing them in the playoffs. We were in the South. We were, I believe, in Region 4, and we had to travel down to teams like Fairhope and teams like BC Rain. Well, now Briarwood hosting a team like Fairhope coming in for the last game for Briarwood. Briarwood is out of the playoffs, so this will be it. Fairhope at Briarwood. Any chance Briarwood pulls out a little something here?
No way.
Jackson
Fairhope playing good ball.
Yeah, Jackson Olin at Foley. Both these teams playoff teams, but Jackson Olin going down to Foley?
No.
Maybe.
No.
This will be the one. Mountain Brook. They travel to Baker. Both teams in the playoffs. Baker worked their way in. Mountain Brook. Can they beat Baker?
They can, but I'm going to tell you, Baker's surprising some people. And, Baker, I think, I hadn't checked this lately, but at one time they were the largest school in the state. They're still pretty close. I mean,
they're up there, I think.
I think Sparkman was the first. But anyway, they're up there. They got a great enrollment. I just think Baker could beat them.
Baker, both of them 2 seeds. If I'd have seen this game, I'd have said, look, Mountain Brook's probably going to be a 1, 2 at worst. Baker struggled to make the playoffs. Now, they did come into a tiebreaker, but the only reason they are in as number 2 is because they beat Foley in the regular season. So that's the only loss Foley had in region play. So should be a good game there between Mountain Brook and Baker, the game at Baker. So Foley and Baker hosting 2 of those. Fairhope will come up to Birmingham to play Briarwood. An interesting game here, a little bit more interesting for us since we call the Thompson games. Huntsville is at Hazel Green this week. Matchup between 2 3 seeds, 1 7A, 1 6A, and Thompson's first opponent will be Huntsville in this one. So with the off week, any Thompson fans out there want to see your first round opponent, go watch Huntsville take on Hazel Green. Yeah,
they'll be on the NFHS network, so you can watch it if you're subscribe there if you're a Thompson fan.
All the Hoover fans, Bob Jones, we mentioned, is playing at Hartselle, so a lot of 7A versus 6A matchups there up in the north. Spain Park, 1-6 in region play, 2-7 overall. They go to Pelham. Pelham's a 2 seed behind Homewood, but Spain Park, they play Briarwood close. Pelham actually played Briarwood close. Can Spain Park beat Pelham?
I don't think so. Can Spain Park? No. I think Pelham, even though they're 6A school, good football team, I think they'll send Spain Park with plenty to work on in the offseason.
2 teams that were so close, but yet so far away in the Tuscaloosa regions. Brookwood just missed out. They were the 5 seed in Region 4. Tuscaloosa County, they were the 5 seed in Region 3. After promising starts to the season, kind of fell apart late. Tuscaloosa County at Brookwood could be a good measuring stick for next year where these teams are.
It really could. And Tuscaloosa County, fell on hard times here at the end of the season. They'd like to end big and keep their pride with a 7A team going against Brookwood, who is a 6A Region 4 team. Brookwood had some moments this year, and I was high on them a little bit, but I think Tuscaloosa County, they'll flex their muscles and put Brookwood down.
Yeah, if County wins this one, they'll finish 6-4, and those 4 losses are Thompson, Hoover, Hewitt-Trussville, Vestavia. No shame in those 4 losses right there, and definitely turning things around. Can't wait to see what next season holds for Adam Weingarten there and the Wildcats. Vestavia, they're in the playoffs. They beat County last week. They are at Helena, and if you'd have told me one of these teams is going to be in, one of these teams is going to be out, I'd have said, Helena's probably a 1 or 2 seed in their region, and Vestavia, new coach, hadn't quite figured it out yet. The exact opposite.
I think Helena is playing for nothing, so they're playing for everything. This is their bowl game. This is, pride. This is everything. So Helena should give Vestavia Hills a good run. I think it'll be a very close ball game.
Look, this is the kind of game when I was in school, we always played Vestavia that last week of the season. Didn't matter for the playoffs. But at Homewood, we had always run through everybody, won the region, and were a favorite to win the state championship. Vestavia was coming in either limping to the playoffs or hadn't made the playoffs. And they come in and they'd whoop us. And that was kind of a wake-up call for us. So I'm kind of curious to see maybe if it's the opposite. Vestavia's been hot now. Helena has fallen on hard times. Does Helena come in and show something? Like you said, it's kind of their bowl game. Do they come in and show something for Vestavia? That game is at Helena High School. Now 7A Region 2. Any other games you get to before we get to that?
You covered them all, John.
A lot of teams we haven't mentioned. Thompson's off. Hoover's off. A lot of big teams are off. Hewitt-Trussville's off. But 7A Region 2. This is no seeds are set right now. The only thing guaranteed is that Central and Auburn are the top 2 in some order. And then you have Dothan, Enterprise, Prattville. Opelika can still get in tiebreakers but cannot win tiebreakers, so they are out of the playoffs right now. Their season is done. They finished 4-4 in region play. However, at 4-3 in region play, Dothan at Jeff Davis. I know Dothan now coaching with an interim coach after what happened last week, but Dothan still fighting for playoff position. They're at Jeff Davis. Dothan 6-3 overall, 4-3 in region at Jeff Davis, who's 3-6, 2-5 overall. Dothan or Jeff Davis?
I'm going with Dothan on this game. And I'll tell you another thing, too. If Dothan, and I know I'm reading this off of your thing, but if Dothan and Enterprise both win, then Prattville has to beat Central. So this is this game we're talking about here, this Dothan game, that's a big game with everybody in Prattville with eyes on that game.
So here's basically the scenarios, and let's just say there's a lot of text on my screen when I write the scenarios of what happens.
I'm having to I have to use all fingers and toes to keep up with this.
All right, so Central and Auburn are the top two teams. If Central wins, they win. If Central loses, Auburn has to win in order to win the region. But they're top two. They're both at home no matter what against the bottom two teams there from Region 1. However, all right, so we mentioned Dothan at Jeff Davis. Enterprise, they're at Lee Montgomery. Lee Montgomery has not won a single region game all season. Enterprise is 4-3. You would assume Enterprise wins that game. So that gets to Prattville and Central Phoenix City, which is the game of the week, in my opinion. And it may have been that anyway, despite the fact that Central's trying to win a region title and Prattville is just trying to make the playoffs. Prattville 4-3 in region play. Central Phoenix City 6-1 in region play. Like you mentioned, if Enterprise and Dothan win and Prattville falls, Prattville misses the playoffs altogether. The only team that can win and still miss the playoffs is Dothan, because if all three teams win, Prattville and Enterprise get in over Dothan. If only Prattville and Enterprise win, then those two make the playoffs. If only Prattville and Dothan win, those two make the playoffs. The difference is going to come with who has to go face Foley and who faces Baker, because if Prattville and Enterprise win, Prattville is the 3 seed because they beat Enterprise head-to-head. If Prattville and Dothan win, Dothan is the 3 seed. Prattville is the 4, because remember early in the season, we had written Prattville off because they lost to Smith Station and they lost to Dothan. And we were like, well, what's happened to Prattville? And then they turned around and beat Central Phoenix City, or not Central, Opelika.
Right, Opelika.
After that, after Opelika had just beaten Central Phoenix City, and we're all like, whoa, what happened? Now you're questioning Opelika for beating Central Phoenix City, but Opelika, the reason they can't win a tiebreaker despite beating Central is because they lost to everybody that's behind them. So before you get to the whole who beat number 1, who beat number 2, if you lost to Prattville, Enterprise, and Dothan, it doesn't matter because somebody's going to win that tiebreaker over you.
And if y'all are wondering why people clap when John Lunceford walks into the room, right there's it. Because I could never explain all that, John. That was absolutely brilliant.
Here's the simple way. I have a million different scenarios.
Right.
If you're Prattville, win, you're in. If you're Enterprise, win, you're in. If you're Dothan, win and pray that you can be in, because Dothan only makes it in if only them and Prattville win, only them and Enterprise win, or only they win. So if all three, if Prattville is able to win and Enterprise wins, which they should, Dothan will still miss out on the playoffs. Prattville will be 3, Enterprise will be 4, and then Central and Auburn, depending on what happens, will be the top 2.
All right, I know everybody's banking on Central Phoenix City beating Prattville, and they should. But I'm going to tell y'all, Prattville has been playing very, very good football. This is going to be a close game, a very close game, and that could throw the monkey wrench into the whole cage.
It could. If Prattville falls and Enterprise and Dothan win, which they are playing, easier teams than Prattville is because they're playing the number 1 team, that would knock Prattville out. Enterprise would be 3, Dothan would be 4. So we'll see what happens with that one. But, we try to pick these games. This is my projected scenario. But, I'm not always the best at picking games.
Well, what a segue. I was going to tell y'all, last week, as many of you know, John and I do a show before the Thompson kickoff called The Tailgate Show. Our guest this week was Rick Burgess and Greg Burgess. And we always pick games, and John and I think we're the best at picking games every week. But, how you have a sign war, where a business across the street from each other, they post things on the sign. We're about to have a show war right here because Rick Burgess and Greg Burgess came in and kicked our butts. John ended up with 8 correct, and I only had 7. But Greg went 10 of 11, and Rick Burgess went 9 of 11. We bow to them. However, if they wanna have a little side thing going on from show to show, then maybe next week John and I might pick some playoff games, and we might challenge Rick and Greg.
Yeah, let's get to the playoffs, not these other random regular
After
season games. That doesn't
right.
matter. The playoffs are what matters. And, I know Thompson fans are saying the same thing. The playoffs are what matters. I know, that a lot of these teams, Austin, Fulton, Huntsville, it's the playoff that matters. So the playoffs are what matters. So who knows? Who knows what we'll do?
I just can't stand getting beat by Rick Burgess. I'll just be honest with you.
Well, we're supposed to be the experts, and then
I
we end up
know.
losing.
It kills me, Rick.
Some guest picker, some singer comes on College Game Day and beats everybody on the panel.
How do they do that? I don't know how they do it.
We're too deep into it. We try to think too hard about it.
Maybe
that's what
it
they
is.
just pick on name brand or something, and it ends up happening.
Right.
But who knows? A lot of teams are off this week. We're off this week with Thompson. We'll be back for the playoffs for that. But, of course, next week does start the playoffs, so we'll have all the matchups. You can check out all the brackets at AHSAA.com. They are not set, as you saw with 7A Region 2 and some of the smaller classifications, 1A, 2A. I mean, there are crazy tiebreakers. There's one region that can even come to a coin flip if it, could potentially come down to it, depending on what happens this week. So I found, how about this before we quit? I found a tiebreaker in class, I believe it's class 1A, it's 1A or 2A, that once you get past the non-region games, if teams play an uneven number of games, and it's not going to matter, but with the lead center point thing, this could have potentially come in because they would have dropped to 9 games total. Then you don't count just non-region games. You count the win totals of all the teams you beat. Now, you can cancel out a lot of teams when you all beat, the bottom teams in the region. But it basically comes down to all the teams you beat, including the teams involved in the three-way tie. So there's a three-way tie. I believe it's in 1A, where they're all tied right now. But the team who is playing another team, if they get the win, they get 2 points to win the tiebreaker. But if they were playing a team that had no wins, which some of them beat teams with no wins, their win would have actually given somebody else the tiebreaker because they lost to them. There was actually a scenario where a team would be better off throwing a game because then it forces a coin flip, whereas if you win the game, you're guaranteed to be out of the playoffs. I mean, can you imagine a scenario where you win a game and you're guaranteed to be out of the playoffs? It shouldn't work that way, right?
No, it should not, but...
Now, it's not going to work that way because the team they're playing has two wins, because even if they only had one win, they'd still get in a tiebreaker at that point with the other team because the other team beat them. So if by way of winning, that team would get one. I know it's confusing, but there's actually a scenario where a team would be better off throwing a game to make the playoffs. That's where the tiebreakers are.
So, John, if it came down to a coin flip, what you calling?
I always have to call tails. My wife asked me that the other day because we were watching, I guess it was the Alabama game or something, and she's like, what? How many times did you go out there? And I was like, I was a captain, a handful of times, and I went out there. And, well, what'd you always call? Well, I always call tails. She said, well, how much did you win that? I said, I don't think I ever won. I think it was always heads every time I went out there and called tails. She said, well, why'd you keep calling tails? And I said, I don't know. I just kept calling tails.
I'll be honest with you. I always call heads. I've never called tails.
You just get stuck with one way. It's like, no, it's going to work this time. It's going to work, I promise.
Well, if it comes down to a coin toss, then if it's tails, John won that guess, and I'll win if it's heads. We'll never know.
The coin flip scenario is crazy. I'm sure it's happened, but it obviously very, very rarely happens. Most of the brackets are set. You can go check all that out at alpreps.com, and then check out the scenarios for various regions, including 7A Region 2, which is interesting to play out this week. But we'll recap that, and we'll look ahead to all 7 classifications when it comes to the brackets. We're going to cut the field in half going into next week, and then we're going to keep cutting it in half until we have 7 teams crowned as state champions there in the first week of December. So for Jerry Young, I'm John Lunceford. This has been Next Round Preps.